Good evening. My name is Councillor Paul Canal and I am the Chair of the Overview Committee. Due to the severe weather warning that has been issued, this meeting is being held online as a change from the usual procedure of meetings at the Town Hall. I'll begin with a roll call of committee members. If you could please respond when called. Councillor Duttridge. Lloyd, you've frozen. Can you hear me? I'll come back to Councillor Duttridge later on. Councillor N. Chowdhury.
Chair, Councillor Treasury is giving her apologies due to work commitment.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Councillor Hussain. Are you present, sir?
I'm present, Chair.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Javed.
Councillor Javed has also given his apologies.
Thank you, sir.
Due to a family commitment.
Appreciated. Councillor S. Johnson.
I'm here, sir.
Thank you. Councillor K. Mahmood.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Rashid.
I'm present, Chair.
Councillor Martin Sachs. So I have heard your voice, Martin. Please confirm it's you.
It is I, and present, sir.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Zammit.
Present, Chair.
I understand we also have Councillor Chataway who is substituting. Is that correct? We have a Councillor B. Chataway.
Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair. Substitute for Hannah Chowdhury.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And I believe we also have a Councillor G. Williams. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair, I'm here.
I'm grateful for your patience and your participation, colleagues. That includes apologies and substitute members.
For the records, I can just confirm that Councillor Guy Williams is substituting for Councillor Mohammed Javed.
Thank you, sir. Declaration of interest.
Excuse me, Chair. I'm not sure if we called out Councillor N. Chowdhury.
I did. The second person I came to, but I didn't get a response, Gilly.
I believe
so
she's
I'll
on
call
the call.
again. Councillor N. Chowdhury, are you there, sir?
I am, but I think Councillor Sachs confused me with Councillor Hannah Chowdhury because, for apologies, but I am here.
Well, we in the Conservative group, we know who you are and we respect you hugely, Councillor Chowdhury. Good to see you this evening.
Thank you.
Right. If you can all turn your mics off now, please. Declaration of interest. All members in attendance are reminded of the requirement to consider whether they have an interest in any matter on the agenda that needs to be disclosed, and, if so, to declare an interest when the committee reaches that item on the agenda. Are there any declarations? Thank you very much indeed. Report to the previous meeting held on the 20th of June rather, of this year. There are no outstanding actions from the previous meeting, so unless there are any comments, we'll note this is a true record. If you have any comments, please raise your hand to speak. I can see no hands. Julie, can you?
No, Chair.
In that case, we will move on and note the minutes as a true record.
Excuse me, Chair. Councillor Zammit has his hand up.
Oh, so he does indeed. He's down on my screen of CZ, which implies she's actually a Czech football player. Councillor Zammit, your comment, sir.
If only I were, no doubt more profitable occupation. But just to say that I think under the regeneration of council estates, I received a very brief comment from officers. But I was thinking more of the buildings we've had on the Old Mill Court estate and so on. And I just think it would be helpful if we could have a further review, if it would be okay with you, Chair, in terms of what is actually happening on our council estates. We're also planning to build additional stories on properties. So I think while that might not quite map exactly with regeneration, I think it's something that perhaps we could have had a fuller response on. So with your permission, Chair, perhaps we could ask officers for that.
I think that's completely fair, Councillor Zammit. And I'd be grateful, Ginny, if you'd make a note of that. And I'm assuming that colleagues agree that we are grateful for the response we've received, but we'd like further detail as intimated by Councillor Zammit. Is that okay, Julie?
That's noted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Councillor Zammit. Item 4, public participation. There are no speakers, so I shall move on to the next item, which is item number 5, executive reports. And we have a number of reports tonight, the first of which is 5A, the budgetary control reports for month 2. I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader for Finance, Leisure and Culture, Councillor Cam Rye, to present the report. Councillor Rye, over to you, sir. I should perhaps have asked first, is Councillor Rye there?
Hello, Chair. I am here.
Yes.
Sir.
Sorry, I wasn't getting. My mic wasn't working very well.
Not a problem at all. I'm glad you managed to make it to work, sir. I now invite you to present the report, sir.
1 moment. Just get my details up. Okay. Okay, Chair. So everyone will know this is at the end of month 2. This is a budgetary control report. So it's talking about the revenue position. So currently it's showing that there's a forecast variance of £19.5 million overspend. So it's being forecast at the beginning of the year what officers believe to be an area of concern for all of us, but in particular for their areas in terms of where they expect there to be additional demand. It's mainly so there's two things just to be noted in this. There is growth that we added into the budgets at the beginning, into the budget that we set in February, of which some of that is being held within corporate underspend. So there is 11.94 million that we have held in corporate items, which was part of the growth and agreements that we had with service areas. So some of this is dependent on some of the performance that we're expecting from each area, and in terms of mitigations and savings that we expect them to deliver. There's also just under 222,000 of underspend against capital financing. There's been a total of just over 3 million of environments between corporate budgets. So that's where service areas have decided, so for example, within children's services or adult social care, to move budgets within their service area to realign it against their pressures and against their needs. So there's no net effect. It's just an internal movement of just over 3 million. And then if you look through the savings, there's just over 12% which are currently being classified as red. So officers are expected to have alternatives for them. And then there's a further 45% which are currently being seen as amber, which means there's work being done to deliver them. But we're classifying them as undelivered at the moment because they've not been confirmed as something that the officers can confirm as a saving we can bank. But there is, as I said, an expectation for improvement in the overall forecast because those ambers should be turning into green over the course of the year. Individually, you're seeing the overspends are showing, for example, in the Communities Directorate of just over 3 million. And that's largely down to some savings that are not being delivered so far, but which are being fully mitigated against, and some with £1 million largely in highways, including inflation costs and staffing and income reductions. Within People Directorate, we're seeing showing the largest level of forecasting overspend, which is of just over 22 million. And adult social care is showing that as 13 million, which includes 2.5 million as the impact of contractual London living wage uplifts, and just under 3 million of inflationary pressures. So members will know that we put in additional money into the budget for inflation, but we're also seeing that whatever we budgeted for as inflation is now escalating well beyond that. And when we talk about the cost of living, as I said before, it's not just impacting individuals and families; it's also impacting organisations such as the council, who's also impacted by whatever the changes are in cost of living, for example, fuel. Individually, we're seeing 5.4 million being forecast for older people's care packages, with mitigations that are again planned as part of the budget for this financial year and not being delivered so far. So there were mitigations that we had planned in, and the expectation is still that we see those being delivered. And within children and families, you're seeing it's a £5.98 million overspend that's being forecast. 3.8 million is relating to looked after children placements because they're seeing a higher caseload and more complex cases, and just under 1.6 million of staffing pressures, including pressures linked to high demand that we're seeing throughout the area. Regeneration culture is forecasting just over 4.3 million, of which just under 1 million is red and amber savings, and 600,000 in relation to planning and building control, including underachievement of the income that was expected from them, and £1 million, which is down to inflation. Resources is showing an £11,000 underspend, and strategy is forecasting 1.3 million, largely down to, as I've said before in the past, that there's a cross-cutting saving which was given to strategy and resources to find, or strategy to find, but which is across the budget, the whole council. So the plan this year is to align that within the different service areas. The main thing that really for me, and it has been, is that I want the mitigation plans to come forward, and we expect them to come forward by the September cabinet as part of the Q1 budgetary control report. Savings, you'll see, we're seeing, as I said, there's 20% so far that have been delivered, just under 21%. They're classified as blue and no further risk. Another 22% are considered to be green, which are on track for delivery currently, with 45% classified as amber, which we're at the moment, we can't assume that they've been delivered, but the expectation is to have them delivered. And there is a remaining 12% of savings that are classified as red, and my expectation has been that they have to be replaced by mitigations or alternative savings. Capital, there isn't a huge amount in there. Well, there is a large amount of capital, but there isn't a huge issue relatively in there. That we're saying that the forecast outturn is of 283 million for the year, and the general fund is forecasting an outturn of 208 million, with 35 million of additional budget for this current financial year being shown. And I think Ian will probably add to that, Chair.
Councillor, thank you for a very comprehensive report introduction. I'm very grateful for that. Mr. Ambrose, what do you wish to add?
Evening, councillors. Just to add a little bit of maybe comfort to the proceedings. As Councillor Rice said, the forecast overspend at month 2 stands at £19.5 million. Obviously, reiterate that's a forecast, not a done deal at this stage. It's very early in the financial year. But you also be aware that we hold contingency budgets and risk provision budgets within the overall budget. And if we wouldn't normally release them this early in the year, but had we released them, that overspend would come down to about 9 million. And then if we concentrate on the delivery of the amber and red savings, as Councillor Wright pointed out, the overspend at this stage would look at just over £1 million. So I'm notwithstanding the huge pressures we were seeing through cost of living, through demand and so on, in terms of overall financial resilience of the budget at the moment, remain comforted that by going through the mitigation plans, by concentrating on savings delivery, we should be okay for this financial year. And then in the wider budget report, just draw your attention to the fact that both the housing revenue account and the dedicated schools grant are both being forecast to be on budget at this point of year. Thank you.
I'm very grateful, Mr. Ambrose, and I have a couple of hands raised. If I may, I'll go straight to members for their comments. I only have the C for councillor and then the first letter of their surname, so I'm at a slight disadvantage. Ginny, can I actually display everybody if I look very carefully? I can. Go on, side. Brilliant.
Yes, people.
Right. So I believe. Oh, good. Everyone's in random order. That's absolutely fantastic, Julie. Thank you for that. I believe I have a hand raised by Councillor Williams. Sir, what is your question to the County Memorandum Officer?
I note with interest all your remarks about higher than expected inflation. Is it possible that might be further impacts depending on political developments in Westminster?
If I can, well, as I say, I could answer from an officer perspective. Of course, we're at the moment we're seeing the inflationary ask of the organisation running roughly 50% above the amount that was set aside for inflation in the year. Clearly, we seem to be in a pretty uncharted territory, both with cost of living uncertainties, but also political uncertainties at the moment. I'm really not able to give a definitive answer as to which way things may move, but obviously the uncertainty is not helping either our in-year position or indeed the next report on your agenda, where we're trying to forecast our medium-term financial position too. It just makes everyone's life that much harder to land a forecast, and more effort being needed to try to stay within the approved budget envelopes.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you. I now call on Councillor Martin Sachs to pose his question or comments.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Rye and Ian Ambrose, for your comprehensive presentations. And in fact, I'm following up on Councillor Williams's point about inflation, because obviously I and my colleagues were part of the budget making process throughout the second half of the last financial year. So we were looking at all of these budget heads in a great deal of detail, but at that time the inflation rate was considerably lower than it is now. We're somewhere in the region of just under 10%, and there are suggestions that it may well go higher. And I would suggest that if we are deluged with a stack of unfunded tax cuts over the next few months, it would be like throwing petrol on fire. That inflationary deluge could get even worse. But even looking at the present rate of inflation, which is considerably ahead of where it was when we drew up the budget, are we not in a position where we may in fact have to look for further savings over and above those that we have earmarked? And I'd be grateful both for a strategic answer from Councillor Rye and also for an officer perspective from Ian Ambrose.
Councillor Rye.
First, yeah, I mean, I could spend all evening commenting about the government, but I don't care what the colour of the government actually is right now. What we need is some stability, so we know. I mean, I'd love to have 4-year settlements. I don't like the fact that every year we have to wait till kind of December, the end of December, to know what the settlement will be, while we're kind of 3/4 of the way into, or 100% of the way into sometimes into our budget setting. So that uncertainty is just unhelpful. We've, you know, we didn't work on a percentage, but we set aside the best part of 9 million for inflation in the budget, so it kind of works out around about 5% of our approximately 5% of our revenue budget. So, and then that's a considerable amount realistically, but we're seeing inflation well above that. So I'm hoping that that when we see the autumn settlement, we see some additional money, the autumn statement, that we see some additional money or some assistance towards it, because we've had these last few months, you know, all of our fuel costs are going through the roof, but we're also seeing pay inflation coming forward as well, through not directly, when we will have that directly when we have the pay settlement, but also through our contractors, where we've got contractual obligations to increase in line with inflation, or at least some tie to inflation. So that's really what the challenge is. In terms of savings, it will. Right now, I mean, I think my aim right now is to make sure that the savings that we've got agreed are the ones we have delivered, and if they're not delivered, then we find the mitigations or the alternatives to deliver them. And if we can get to that stage, and we can have, you know, most of our budgets held in line with what we've provided, then it gives us a far smaller challenge to kind of tackle at the end of the year. And if there is, you know, if we then need to find additional amounts for inflation, then I think that on its own is something that's a far smaller issue for us to contend with.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ambrose, any further comment?
Yeah, just sort of point out the figure that Councillor Wright spoke about in terms of inflation set aside includes money set aside for our own pay award and the impact of the government's NI increase as well on the organisation. So it's, although it sounds a big number, it's been stretched over a lot of areas to cope with. In terms of what that pay inflation itself would like, obviously I'm slightly compromised myself or conflicted in answering that question, but I can't imagine it will be that the unions will easily settle for a low below what we've provided for type settlement, so that it like will add more pressure later in the year when that comes into agreement. In terms of the government situation, I mean, they're fairly silent on addressing the issues of the cost of living on councils. I know that the various local government bodies, including the LGA, are lobbying government around additional support for cost of living. I can't remember which ministers said what, or whether those particular ministers are still actually in post. But the only thing I did hear basically was that councils should look to their own resources to cope with the in-year pressure rather than expect more money from government in year. So I think, Chair, that gives you a flavour of the approach that we'd need to take if we find ourselves not being able to cope with the inflation pressures as they continue to rise in the year, that we will have to look to ourselves to try to reduce our expenditure. I'd be really nervous about us doing knee-jerk reactions in terms of major savings for cost of living immediately, because hopefully it is temporary and transitory, but nonetheless we need to find ways to reduce our spending to keep our books in balance for the year.
Thank you, sir. And if I might come back on that very briefly, obviously the longer we wait, the less impact of any savings we make actually is. So can you balance those two things for me?
I think the point in case is really what Councillor Rice said, that we're expecting mitigation plans for all the pressures that we're currently seeing in the budget to come forward to the next cabinet cycle in September. So officers will be working on those to identify realistic options to reduce other things to rebalance the books in year.
Thank you, sir. Can I call on Councillor Lloyd Doddridge to pose his question or comment, please?
Thank you, Chair. So moving from Westminster to Woodford, there's been a lot of talk about mitigation plans. And I wondered how much the mitigation plans have factored in changes in resident circumstances as well for the cost of living. So I see a number of talks around efficiencies in council tax collection and other things that are going to be put on better efficiency in how we reclaim money from residents. But if the cost of living really bites our residents locally, how much is that going to be factored into our mitigation plans in September?
I can talk about this, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah, so we're reviewing, I think, the way that we're collecting council tax anyway. We've always had a different approach. People that are on council tax support schemes in terms of providing them with support throughout the year, if it's helping them pay the bill or if it's about spreading it out further. So that we just need to go back on. The other bit that we are working on is the jobs and skills side. So if there are people that are out of work or do need help in getting better paid work, then that work's happening right now. I did get a briefing note on that recently, actually, and I can share that with colleagues at the next overview. But it was around targeting support to people who've been longest out of work or have got who require the support the longest. Then the other bit that we're doing right now is we're distributing just over £2 million of household support funding, but it's being staged. So we've got to get it out of the council by the end of September. But some of it needs to factor into the need that's going to fall into, because we don't know if we're going to get any more money. So it needs to factor into how we can support people into the autumn, because as we all know, that there is a worry and a concern around people with their household bills and their utility bills, and so we're looking at ways in which we can support people in that area. And it's even looking at the most basic of things. You know, if we I know it sounds weird talking about it this time of year with today's weather, but it's almost like distributing blankets and as part of making sure if people haven't got those needs, if that's what they need, then that's what we'll do to get out to people. It's more about, you know, because there are a lot of people who are afraid. I'm sure you've seen that, Councillor Dudridge, and you've seen in your casework. There are people who are just afraid to use utilities right now, let alone when the cold weather bites later in the year. They're afraid to use it to cook right now, and we're hearing that from GPs and from primary care, that people are afraid right now. So I think we need to look about as a campaign about how we're here to support them. These are what the things we can do. These are the things you can do to stay warm. We're literally going to have to talk about that. And this is the support that we've got in place for food, and part of that is giving money to food banks for doing that right now, so that they might not really need it right now, but it gives them that they can buy stocks and they can buy, you know, things that they will be distributing in later part of the year. But I think we're at that stage where we're thinking of all the ideas we can, you know, that can come forward, and I think we'll bring that report, I think, in the next round, so that people can kind of pull it apart and think about anything else that we might have missed.
Thank you, sir. I'm grateful for your response and for the question. Can I now call on Councillor Rashid to make her comment or question, please?
Thank you, Chair. To be honest, you know, in this crisis, the pandemic and also the war, everything, I can see this, you know, our council officers very skillfully and with their experience, with the support of our finance person, Camera, you know, they are doing very good job. So I just would like to know regarding borrowing, you know, this they are looking for low interest and which they are thinking of bond. I just would like to know if the council wants to borrow internally, how much will be the interest rate? If this interest rate is lower than the external, you know, borrowing, so are we thinking to borrow money internally?
I mean, Ian will probably add it, but there's a couple of things going on. The internal borrowing is just borrowing from yourself, so it just means not necessarily going out to go to the market to borrow, using your reserves for a time frame as well. But Ian, you can talk about I can't remember how much is left of that bond that we issued, but that was set at a rate which is considerably lower than you're able to borrow now.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, we're straying a bit into the Treasury report, which is later on your agenda. But at the moment, we already use surplus cash flows to avoid going to market for borrowing. Well,
let's save that for the Treasury report then, gentlemen, shall we?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rashid, for your question. I see no further questions or hands raised on this item. Can I thank Mr. Ambrose and Councillor Rye for answering the questions and presenting the reports? And can I confirm that the report is noted, colleagues? Thank you very much. I'm seeing no hands against, so we'll move on. Thank you, and thank you again. I'm pleased to confirm that we're keeping our star witnesses here this evening, to quote a Radio 4 show. And the next item, 5B, medium-term financial strategy update. Can I once again call on Councillor Rye to present that item, please, sir?
Thank you, Chair. So this is the annual report, which is an update on the medium-term financial strategy that we put together for February, and it's basically looking at approval for updates to the position based on revised assumptions, which are, you know, is probably more appropriate now than any other time with the change in the market and the economy. So what we had as a budget gap for the next financial year that was presented to council was just over 21.1 million that showed a potential gap over the 4 years, or an estimated gap over the 4 years of 58.5 million. This report now proposes to increase that. Primarily it's driven by inflation and some demand related costs, so alongside adding an additional year, so for the next financial year that we're adding onto it. So it shows a revised gap for the next financial year is 27.4 million that we need to plan for our next budget, and 79 million over the next 5 years period spanning 2023, 24 to 27, 28. Within the Appendix A, you can see what the changes are. But as I said, the largest change is an extra £5 million of inflation for the next financial year, and the one and 24-25, and another 5 million for demographic pressures for 23-24. Because what we're seeing, as I said, right now is either we're seeing some additional demand, but it's not necessarily just always in the numbers. In the previous report, you saw that there were more complex needs for adult social care and children's services, which effectively add an additional cost to us. And there is concern, and part of that consideration for that demographic pressure is down to what we're expecting, the risks that are around social care reform, because we're hearing in government about taking away some of that national insurance, for example, that was planned in, that was going to go first to the NHS and then come to social care. And if that's now taken away at anytime soon, then that will then just push that back and add more cost to us really long term over the next 5 years. There's also a reduction in the risk provision of 1.5 million and a revised inflation assumption for business rates, and which reduces the net impact. The report also outlines further assumptions. So we've got a key one is that there is an assumption there'll be no significant overspend for 22-23. So that flies against what we're seeing right now as our forecast. But as Ian outlined, there is money that we've held corporately that will mitigate against much of that, but also the expectation that those savings are delivered, which will then bring that right down. But then if not, again, the expectation has and will continue to be that mitigation is found. So officers are expected to either find additional savings or to rein in that demand. But that's the expectation. There's no assumed council tax increase within the budget for the next 5 years, and a modest kind of recovery plan for council tax base is assumed. So we with where the economy is going, we're not expecting the council tax base to increase in the same levels that we've seen in the last few years. And then it's talking about the budget intended timeline to feed in from February 2023 for budget meetings and proposals when they will be presented, and to commence on developing a bigger transformational savings to address the longer term budget gap. So essentially what we're saying here is we want to continue with what we've done over the last 8 years, and that is to look at transformation, look at income generation, look at doing things differently before we look at cutting services. Within the report, you're seeing budget risks nationally and globally, and specifically inflation being the most significant one. And then there's a section on our reserves and indicating that we've got a far stronger position after the 21-22 outturn that we'll speak about next, and the importance that we've put on increasing our reserves and increasing therefore our financial resilience.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Ambrose, you wish to add anything to that?
Not much really, Councillor. As Councillor I pointed out, there's no assumption in here at all about council tax. There's very little assumption in regard to changes in government funding. One of the maybe the bizarre impacts of the current cost of living crisis is if the government treats business rates in the normal manner, we should see the rates of business rates increase substantially. I'm sure that won't necessarily be passed on to businesses, but in normal times, the government would recompense the government for that lost income through additional grant. So we've made some assumption around there, sort of as optimistic as your Reverend Friday accountants being for you at the council here. I'd also point out that through previous budget rounds, we've already baked in £11 million worth of savings into this forecast. Over and above the savings that are due to be delivered in the current financial year, there's already an assumption of a further 11 million that should be in the pipeline ready for delivery. The £79 million budget gap that is flagged can be, I don't mind how it's met. It can be met through savings, through efficiencies, but equally it can be met through additional income generation, changing the way that we do things, or indeed by actually finding ways to mitigate or dampen demand pressures that we're anticipating within the forecast. So just because we've got a budget gap of £79 million doesn't necessarily mean that we have to find £79 million worth of savings across that period. There's multiple ways that we could work to actually close that gap over the forthcoming years.
Thank you. Let me turn to members, and I'll turn, if I may, first to Councillor Duddridge. Over to you, sir. Your question or comment.
Thank you, Chair. And as I'm sure you will agree, businesses are often at their best when they are left alone. But my question is there any plan around growth, and particularly around encouraging residents to spend their money in Redbridge and try and stimulate some success in our local businesses over the next year or so, particularly those that have been struggling through COVID and the cost of living crisis?
Councillor Roy.
Sorry, Lloyd, you cut out when you were talking the last bit. Your sentence. Do you mind repeating?
Well, I don't know where you heard up to, but I suppose my final point was a lot of these businesses locally have been through both COVID and a cost of living crisis. Is there anything we can do as a council to encourage local residents to spend money in Redbridge in those businesses, and thereby hopefully stimulate growth both for them and for us as a council?
Yeah, and there are a few things we're doing right now. So if anyone wants to look on the business landing page of the council, you'll see that there's a section about shop click it local. So you can use that app to kind of shop locally, and they'll kind of go to different providers and shop for you. There's also you'll see that we're doing support for businesses about how to kind of promote their own business right now, because we've got lots and lots of micro businesses and lots of small one man, one woman kind of businesses in the borough, but they kind of have many. If you look at them, they're kind of set up by accident. It feels like sometimes, or they've been set up as an income for the family rather than necessarily treated as a business. So we're giving support there about how they can improve their business and get further into the local economy. And then there's a piece of work that's being done right now, which is trying to attract new business to the borough. So there's an incentive scheme. And as part of that, it's like a package. So effectively, if you said you wanted to set up a business X in the borough, and you were bringing something new to Redbridge or something that's missing from a part of Redbridge, we're looking at an incentive scheme there. So it's either that you get a reduction in business rates, but if you don't apply for business, if your business is not applicable for business rates, then you get a grant once you set up over a period of time. But there are things you've got to do for that. So one of those things will be, potentially paying London Living Wage or employing locally. So that's something that I'm hoping to introduce quite soon, really. So it's just another way to kind of show people that Redbridge is open for business. If you want to set up here, you can come and set up.
And will ward councillors, obviously in conjunction with the residents, be able to feed into that? So say on George Lane, maybe this is a pet project of my own, but a bookshop would be great. Would it be okay to, feed in, if it's obviously economically viable, with the council to try and bring about those anomalies in some of our high streets?
Yeah. I mean, that's an example of a business that we've got very few of in the borough, but we know there's a demand. But it's about making sure, someone needs to feel that they've got a bit of courage, not the courage, but the support, because it's difficult setting up a business, as everyone knows, and the failure rate is quite high. So we need to. What the point here we're trying to do is say, look, let's give examples of what's missing in the borough. There aren't enough cycle shops, for example. I can only think of a couple really in the borough. There aren't bookshops aren't around, and there's lots of other examples of things that we could say that aren't around. But the point is, if we can, absolutely everyone can feed into that. But the ultimate aim here really is actually to secure our business rate income, because if we can get that up and running, the high street becomes more vibrant because there's more diversity on the high street. People will hopefully shop there more, and it will help all of the existing businesses as well, because you're not going to just go to your bookshop, you're going to have a coffee afterwards, Lloyd. Or whatever else it might be.
Thank you.
Thank you for that response. If I may add, thought should also be given as to how people get to the shops, and most people do drive, and we need to balance our parking strategy against the fact that people need to be able to drive to the shops and park there easily and have access to cheap or free parking. I know in Wanstead we've lost several thousand yards of parking during the lockdown, and indeed we've lost 6 parking spaces on the high streets. So that is a consideration for the future, I would suggest. Can I now call on Councillor Zammit for his question or comment, please?
Thank you. I've got 3 questions and comments, so I'll pitch them in.
You're only allowed one, Neil, I'm afraid, so choose the best one.
Okay. So I'd probably go with, how does our level of risk compare with other authorities?
Okay, so
Councillor Rye.
Yeah, Ian will probably give you the exact figure, but we're in a stronger position now this year than we were last year, because when I was looking at the reserves position, when I was comparing us with other boroughs, we were in the bottom quartile, and now we've moved out of that. I believe that's correct. Ian will correct me if it's not correct. So that's reassuring in that respect, and there's work that we're doing continually. So every time a local authority gets into trouble, I'm always asking Maria and Ian to pull together a comparison of all the issues that have been raised there, and looking at ourselves and kind of rag rating ourselves in the same way, so that we'll keep that kind of running all the time, so that every time there is a local authority with issues, some things are repeated, but sometimes something new turns up, and we kind of grade ourselves against that. And if we're coming to any stage which is something, well, basically red or amber, I want to see that green quite quickly. So that's a continual thing. So that, because there is always a risk, because of the way there isn't any fat in the system. That's really where we are. If anybody says that there is fat in the system, there certainly was, probably, let's be honest, maybe 10, 12, 15 years ago, but there isn't anymore, because we've managed to keep most of our services going, and in some cases introduce new ones, but there isn't that capacity in the council to kind of be as reactive as maybe I would like it to be, because we don't have those spare bodies, we don't have those that capacity, and that's what makes every annual budget and then the forecasts more precarious, because we know there isn't that capacity. But I feel more confident than I did last year, but it is something that keeps me awake, Neil. But Ian will give you a clearer picture on where we are, probably, as a more pessimistic.
Ian.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, in terms of our reserve position, if you go through budget making and the statement that the Corporate Director for Resources makes around the robust estimates and reserve levels, we keep a general fund balance of 10% of our net budget. We keep risk reserve of 10% of our net budget too. So we've automatically setting aside a huge amount of money for should we be hit with something really unexpected. Within the budget itself, we currently set aside over £7 million directly for risk, and a further 3 million for contingency. But for the type of things that we are experiencing right here, right now, in terms of how we compare to other authorities, that's until the statistics are being published and so on, it's difficult to give a precise figure. But based on the reserves position as at the 31st of March, I'm firmly of the opinion we should have shifted ourselves very strongly into the middle of the pack. We're never going to be at the levels of Westminster and the City of London and so on in terms of our reserve levels, but in terms of being a far safer position, a far more resilient position, I should say, than we have been in recent years, we have turned our very much towards the green in that regard, with the successful outturn that we had last year.
I'm grateful for the response, gentlemen. Can I call on Councillor Martin Sachs to make his comment or question, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is actually more of a point of order than a comment or question on the report. And that point of order is not your interpretation of the standing orders of the council in relation to your response to Councillor Zammit somewhat creative, in that it has normally been the past practice of this committee to allow questions in quite a lot of forensic detail, and I'd actually refer to your predecessor as chair of this committee, Councillor Huggett, who used to ask 15 or 16 questions on the finance reports, and also her deputy chair, the former Councillor Howard Berlin, who also used to ask questions in that sort of number.
Well, I'd be grateful if we could look forward and not look backwards, Councillor Sachs. And my aim is to give every member of the committee a chance to ask a question. It's also my aim, as it's a very hot evening, to run the meeting efficiently and expeditiously. So whilst I appreciate your interjection, I intend to carry on doing it as I'm doing it currently. I'll happily have a conversation with you offline later on, but I appreciate the point you've made. If I may now call on Councillor Mahmood for their question or comment, please.
I just want, following from Councillor Dadridge comment on business expansion and stuff. I just wanted to find out, what's been happening in terms of recruiting local people as an apprentice or graduate program. We got a lot of professionals within the service, like social worker, OTs. They've been contracted out, as agency workers. But are we looking at, sort of recruiting local graduates to do, for example, sort of like social worker, training with different institutions? For example, East London University to run a year program or sponsoring a program for a year to train them as a social worker and bind them for 5 years. Things like that, could be done to, improve the local recruitment as well and supporting our young people within the borough. Thank you.
Councillor Rye.
I can give it a go, Chair. I'm not sure it's for this report though, but I think we can't really bind people to us. The serfdom has kind of been stopped a couple of centuries ago. But we do recruit for apprentices, and we're doing that right now. We do help people graduate to university and graduate through university as well. So we are doing that right now. There is an incentive as well within. There is a scheme that the government did a few years ago, which is quite a good one, which is a contribution that we set aside each year for apprenticeships. So yes, we do that, but we're looking for staff. The point is actually in social care, we're looking for staff from wherever we can get them for, because there just isn't that pool of people. So we're always looking, and we're always doing internal recruitment.
Thank you, sir. Any further comment, Mr. Ambrose?
I was just thinking, Chair, my colleague Julian Ellaby may be able to give a better indication of the work that we've been doing recently around apprenticeships. But we'll just add to Councillor Rye's comment of within our contract awards and so on, where we're seeking social value. Quite often that includes an element of apprenticeship and so on for local residents to try to foster the skill base, not just within the council, but in the wider, using our procurement strength to
could I suggest then,
elsewhere.
Mr. Ambrose, that we ask our clerk to raise that as a query, and so we can have an answer sent to Councillor Mahmood and CC to the rest of us, so we get he gets a better idea of what we are doing and what's going well, and that is shared with others. Would that make sense, Julie?
Chair, just to say, Mr. Ellaby is actually on the call. Is at the meeting.
Okay, in that case, Mr. Ellaby.
Make Julian work. He's here.
Yes.
Thank you.
There's a desire, sir, to drag you away from the sofa and your chilled glass of water and respond to the question. Are you there, sir?
I'll be very quick. Just to say, Councillor Mahmood, we have a range of schemes at the moment, and I think what's important, as an example, we did a recruitment fair all day the other day to try and get more people to sign up to become social workers and to be recruited into the organisation. It's a big piece of work for us. We have now got a proper apprenticeship scheme inside the organisation. It's not only for people coming in to do apprenticeships, but you can use the levy to support learning and development. And so we now have a range of schemes for the first time supporting people around digital skills, data skills, etc., as part of their learning and development. We've also got Kickstarter schemes inside the organisation, which is bringing young people into the organisation. And we run a graduate scheme, which is obviously bringing a number of graduates in year on year as we kind of develop those as well. So I think, Chair, we've got multiple kind of avenues finally to try and bring people in. We are very conscious the challenge for us is around social workers particularly. And so we're putting extra work into a recruitment campaign around social workers, because that's obviously really important to us. And big emphasis, obviously, on employing local wherever we can. But we're in a very competitive market in that instance. But we're doing lots of work. So I'll pause there.
Thank you, sir. I'm very grateful. Councillor Zamir, I'm running ahead of time, so I'd like to give you a further bite of the cherry. Would you care to pose a second question, sir?
Right, I've got to flick back through my notes. Just forgive me for a second, Chair.
Chair,
I think the
Point of order. Do you have to?
no, please bear with me. It's very hot. I think the other main one, there was I think a typographical error on page 36, but on page 32, when we're talking about risk, the assumption is that we will have a zero council tax from 23-24 onwards. And I just wanted to hear a bit more about officers and Councillor Rye's thinking about that, because obviously council tax is a big part of our income. And if we make an assumption it's going to be zero, then that's going to push our risk up. If we had council tax at 5%, for example, that would reduce our risk significantly. So the two questions really knock into each other. So thank you very much, Chair, for that. And I do apologise for having to go back through my notes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Rye. You're on mute, sir, Councillor Rye.
No, I'm going to say, so the medium-term financial strategy, while it is my report, it's a compilation basically of the work of officers about bringing forward the bits that they are controlling and the expectations. So I'll ask questions further along that. I'm not interested in putting council tax rises into our medium-term financial strategy. Sorry, Ian, but I'm not going to rescue officers with that. I want them to do their part, which is to close that gap, provide mitigations, make sure the savings are met, and make sure they stay as close as possible into their budgets. And then we, as councillors, will decide if there's going to be a council tax increase at any stage.
Thank you, sir. I have a hand. Oh, it's gone. I did have a hand raised by our esteemed leader, Councillor Atwell, but he seems to have disappeared. I'm terribly sorry, Jazz.
I think we moved off of the point that Councillor Mahmood made, Chair. It's just to say that the council does subscribe to the LGA scheme on graduates, which is a really good scheme. And only this morning at 8:30, I had a discussion with the chief executive if we could run our own Redbridge scheme for graduates and pick some of the best local talents, because we have a record of really sort of educating people all the way up to degree level, but then not retaining them afterwards, as Councillor Mahmood sort of indicated. But what we want to do is bring in our own scheme so that we can have access to all departments with some of the brightest talent from across the borough. And of course, it'll encourage them to, drop their anchor here and stay and be part of the journey going into the future, rather than just using us for the schooling, which is outstanding. So, it is something that we're looking at actively, Councillor Mahmood, and we will be working towards this actively, and plus all the other things that Julian said as well. But he wouldn't have been privy to the conversation I had with the chief this morning.
I'm grateful for the interjection of information, Councillor. Thank you very much indeed. If I may pose one question, please, Councillor Ryan, Mr. Ambrose. On table 3, the MTFS updated on page 66, the service-based budget line, the first line, we recorded amounts each year, and the total amount is actually the amount from year 1. Yet all the lines below it are totaled up over the course of 5 years. Could you explain the rationale behind that to me, please?
Yes, Jane, in the total column, it's essentially what we're saying is the totality of the additions that we are thinking are required into the budget. So from a standing start of this year of £201 million, for instance, we're saying we would need to add inflationary pressures of 35 million over the 5-year period. We need to add a further 12 million in respect to levies, a further 6 million in respect of pension pressures. So that's why the only other number is cumulative, because we're taking like our opening position now and adding on a 5-year amount to come to, by the end of the position for 27-28, in 5 years' time, we'd expect our service budgets to be running at £216 million by that combination of additions around inflation pressures and the like, and then reductions around savings and the anticipation that we are obviously chunking down the pressures through other savings and, as I said before, in terms of demand control, additional income and so on coming through. Hopefully that helps.
I'm grateful for the information. Could I suggest there may be a presentation issue for others who actually look at the actual chart in the future? There might be a different way of presenting it, so that's actually more obvious. But thank you for the explanation.
I'll happily explore that for you, Chair.
Thank you, sir. As there are no further questions from committee members, can I confirm that the report and discussion are noted, colleagues?
Noted.
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. I now turn to item 5D, the Corporate Grants Programme. And I believe we have the Cabinet Member for Occupational Communities, Councillor Howard, to present it. Are you there, Councillor Howard?
I am indeed. Thank you, Chair.
Over to you.
Thanks, Chair. So I think this is a relatively straightforward report. I'll just outline some of the premise behind it. So this updates on the Cabinet report of the previous grant programme, which takes us up to 2020 to all the way through to 2022. Also gives a bit of an update around COVID. So our initial grant programme, we made some awards as we usually do to charities. Then obviously COVID happened and there was concern from the sector around, well, concern I think a lot of us had around just getting through. So our charities are providing a really excellent service and really supporting their users and our residents throughout the pandemic and quite a lot of the work. So we extended the grants programme to just get them through the next couple of years and get them over the hump as such, to try and get them through the pandemic without anyone falling over. I suppose the interesting bit really is in section 6 on page 99, which talks about the grants programme going forwards. So there's a couple of different changes to the way we fund some of our third sector partners. So it creates a community seed fund, which is a £50,000 fund for grants up to £3,000. So I can only describe this as this is the sort of request we get come in usually via councillors or direct to the council saying, do you have a couple of £100 to, you know, buy us a fridge or to help fund a minibus for a little bit? Is those are one-off requests. So it's like a sort of it's a pool to fund those short-term one-off requests that we may get in that the sector might need. And then see 6.3 is what I think is a really interesting bit. So obviously it's all very interesting. This is the particularly interesting bit. So this focuses on funding some of the more structural infrastructure bits of the sector. So at the moment in Redbridge, we have a couple of really big players and lots of one-man and one-woman bands focused on very small parts of the third sector. And actually we're trying to encourage them to be more self-sustaining, so not entirely relying on council funding, but also growing the sector, so having more independent advice and guidance, which also has a benefit on council pressures in terms of people turning up at the council front door. Maybe they can be best supported in the community. So this is funded into 3 parts. So it's infrastructure support, funding for information, advice and guidance, and delivering services to support residents with physical and mental health needs in Redbridge. And then finally, 6.4 is the £10,000 to fund the local lottery and the public voluntary sector partnership. I think all in all, it gives a nice summary of the funding third sector's had over COVID and just before that. Also, I think sets out a slightly more positive way of funding the sector going forwards and allows the sector to become much more self-sustaining, which we see in lots of other boroughs across London, and also allows them to stand on their own 2 feet and not entirely reliant on council funding, which we know is decreasing year on year on year. So hopefully this allows them to not only just survive, also to grow. I think I've covered everything, but Julian, you might want to, anything I've missed off you'd like to point out?
So,
I'd only add one point, Chair, which is that part of this work we're doing on the grant is also part of developing a longer term strategy with the voluntary sector. And I think it's kind of trying to create some stability so that we can create that longer term approach, because we can see that with roughly 350 different organisations across the borough, there's many of them, but we need to create a resilient strategy that kind of allows them to grow and flourish over the coming years.
Thank you, sir.
Julian's also Chair. Julian's also wanting to say that while members might not be familiar with the figures, we've been consulting and speaking heavily with the third sector. So this is not a surprise to any of them who previously received funding from us. They're pretty aware of this report and what's in it.
Gentlemen, thank you. Councillor Zammit.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I mean, I'm not going to fall down the trap of saying I've got more than one question, because obviously that's going to push me to the sidelines straight away, isn't it? But I think it's very interesting. We've got the comments here that it is, you know, sort of a micro and mini sort of voluntary sector. I mean, years ago, I used to sit at meetings when I was chair of Age Concern Redbridge or chair of Redbridge Council for Voluntary Services and hear how we had a vibrant voluntary sector. Well, it might be vibrant, but it's also very small. And when you look at the voluntary sector in Redbridge compared with other boroughs like Camden, Islington and so on, it's really very, very small in comparison. And I think the comments that Councillor Howard's made about, you know, individuals, well-intentioned individuals sometimes doing very good work, rather than substantial organisations is absolutely right. And part of that is because the council has historically, not under our watch, but under the previous watch, failed to invest in the voluntary sector. If I look at, for example, the area which I perhaps was most obviously identified with, which would be Age Concern, day centres in other boroughs would have almost certainly been run by the voluntary sector and probably by Age Concern. Here in Redbridge, the council resolutely refused to pass the management of day centres onto the voluntary sector. And I think that's perhaps typified the approach in the past. Sorry, Chair, if I sound critical of your administration. And I do support Mr. Ellaby's comments about needing to have a strategy for the voluntary sector. I'm 100% behind that. But I think one of the things that concerns me is that the grants programme is in a sense being seen as independent from the strategy. And if we look at page 67, I see that there is still a 0.46 thousand cut in the grants programme, and how that's going to be sustained against a desire on everyone's part to see the voluntary sector in Redbridge invested in and flourishing. So I think there are some outstanding questions here. And I would be very keen to see something more in terms of the timetable for development. It's part of our corporate strategy as well. If you look at our corporate strategy, that's the voluntary sector is part of that, and investment in the voluntary sector. And I think we just need to square the circle a bit. So how can cuts in the voluntary sector grants be squared with investment, and squared with development, and is squared with a history of underinvestment in the voluntary sector? So I think probably, Julian, it's down to you to answer that one. Sorry about this.
Can I go to Councillor Howard first, because that was a very detailed exposition of where we are. And although Councillor Zammit referred to the past, you've been involved for 8 years, John, so this is very much in your half of the pitch. What are your thoughts on the remarks of Councillor Zammit?
I think Councillor Zammit has always hit the nail on the head for the most part. So one of the problems with having lots of micro charities is that some good examples of trying to shift the narrative around it. So it makes it very hard for them to fundraise. So applying for trusts and foundations and that sort of thing, which is the bread and butter of small and medium charities, it makes it really hard to do. So if you're, if I'm running a charity that has a turnover of like £5,000, it's based out of my house, it's not going to attract any funding. So it makes it hard to grow the charity and support more service users. It also makes it very hard to take on council services. So in other parts of the country, you might have like an alliance approach where they come together and they also they might run the council's advice and guidance service, for instance, and so do that in conjunction with CAB. And actually, none of our charities are probably big enough to quite support that at the moment. So we're trying to help them to grow a little bit as well. In terms of the upcoming strategy, I think me and Councillor have already talked about it in the past. There's probably not going to be a huge amount of surprises in there without prejudging a strategy that's not written and isn't even in draft yet. It is going to focus, I'd imagine, on infrastructure, growing the sector, and advice and guidance. So it falls vaguely in line with the themes we've set out. In terms of the funding argument, I think it's a good point well made. Obviously, I'd like to spend a lot more money on the voluntary sector, but I'd like to spend a lot more money on lots of things across the council. And I think this approach we've set out is more around spending our money more wisely. So making sure that every pound, if we're spending £1 for one grant, is there a chance of growing that pound and using that to fundraise more money off the back of it, rather than what we were doing, which was funding charities that are unlikely to fundraise off the back of it, But I take on board Councillor Zammit's point. I'd love to spend more money on it, given the choice, but I'm not sure it's a choice that we've got.
Mr. Enderby, do you want to add to what Councillor Howard said?
Yes, if that's all right, Chair. Just a few quick points. One is to say that the investment that we put into the third sector is obviously much more than the grant itself. We obviously have multiple contracts via different services. So if you were looking at the People's Directorate, for instance, you would see there are kind of commissioned pieces there. So I think there's a broader infrastructure question here about how we work both as ourselves, but also with partners like health and how we commission locally. There's a piece of work which I'm picking up with other colleagues around procurement. And again, as a kind of how you procure and how you do that into the sector. And again, that's thinking a bit more about the value that we get locally. So how do we use procurement to support local enterprise? And the last point, which is a kind of consistent point for the organisation, is how do we help what is described as probably a cold spot for some of our third sector in Redbridge by pitching to get more resources from regional and national pots. And so that's the other side of it that we're working on. And again, cross-party support to achieve some of that is really helpful, but we are working on that side of it as well, Councillor Zammit.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Sachs.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Howard and Julian Allaby, for your contributions. And I very much go with the point and share Councillor Zammit's enthusiasm for delivery and meeting of need within Redbridge by bodies independent of and separate from us as a council. I would like a bit more information though on how, I mean, we were just talking about, and John particularly was talking about value for money. So how we assess the grant applications for value for money, and how we ensure that the money that we are feeding out into the community is going. I think there are two conflicting objectives. I think as councillors representing all parts of the borough, north to south, east to west, how we ensure this resource is spread fairly all round the borough, but also obviously we've got pockets of deprivation and great need, and how we ensure those are met. Then, having assessed the grants and doled out the money, what assessment is made to ensure that the money is actually doing what the grant application said on the tin? So if we could have a little bit of information on that, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Howard.
So you'd be pleased to know that I'm going to throw this over to Julian, because I don't do the assessments myself. It'd be improper I think it'd be improper for a council to make that sort of decision. But Julian, you know, it's a bit like
we call this a hospital pass, Julian. So over to you.
Yeah, it's appreciated. So we have an officer panel that assesses the criteria by which they apply by, and we have scoring against that. We take the recommendations to the cabinet member for approval, and then what we have to do is we have to monitor kind of implementation. We also monitor, we have obviously multiple conversations with the third sector about this as well. And I'm just having a quick look, just checking my notes. And then so what we're trying to do, of course, is align it to the corporate plan piece as well, to make sure that it's measured against outcomes. So when we talk about scoring criteria, Councillor Sachs, we kind of now start to look at it from the perspective, is it contributing to the outcomes that the organisation has signed up to? But we are, I mean, we'll come back to it later, but we're also looking at a broader performance framework for the organisation. So it's about assessing impact more and more. Hope that helps.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Zammit.
I just wanted to have a final word on this. I mean, I don't disagree with what Julian Ellaby said at all. In fact, I 100% agree with it. But I think my point was that, yes, we do have contracts with voluntary sector organisations, but our contracts are very, very much smaller than they are in other authorities. So the ability of the council to actually not only stimulate the voluntary sector via grants, and also by trying to get grants from outside the council itself, by people like London councils and so on, where I've been very heavily involved in grant raising in the past, is that we have very much smaller contracts with the voluntary sector, and in fact getting a contract out of the council is a bit like drawing hen's teeth. And also when we're talking about performance, I mean, a contract's one thing, but a grant is another. A grant, when you're on the receiving end of it in the voluntary sector, as I have been for a very long period of time, it's almost exactly like a contract. You know, people are down your throat every 3 months, demanding to see what you've done, what's been spent, and so on. So there's no doubt in my mind that the council has been absolutely spot on in terms of monitoring what's happened. My concern is that the overall amount of money we're putting into the voluntary sector is smaller, significantly smaller than in other councils. And I just think we need to have a good hard look at that. I'm going to close there, Chair. I've said enough.
Well, let me ask you a question, Councillor Zammit, which I know is an unusual way of running this meeting. But are you suggesting that if the council was to move some of its expenditure into voluntary sector, that money would both stay in the local economy and would generate a return greater than the return we get now by not doing that and contracting with actually commercial organisations? Do you think there'd be greater social benefit, greater capacity building, and greater benefit to the local economy if we changed our existing model?
Well, I wouldn't be dictatorial about that, but I think it's an option we should look at. And I think the benchmark really is how much we've been putting into the voluntary sector compared with people like Camden, Islington, people south of the river like Richmond and so on. And age concern would be the benchmark I would use. You know, people elsewhere put a lot more money in, and it was primarily around day centres with age concern. But I mean, that's just one model. And I think it's just something we need to consider. And the advantage of having a bigger voluntary sector, a more muscly voluntary sector, is that the people are then more able to go after grants from other organisations. So it's a sort of a synergistic sort of approach. But I wouldn't be sort of categorical about it. You can't just shift the money and expect to get a response. I mean, you've got to do it in a controlled and managed way. But I leave that thought on the table for you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, sir. And I suggest that this may be an interesting working party to take evidence from people within the sector themselves and our own internal staff to find out whether there is a way in which we can spend scarce resources in a way that generates perhaps improved services and perhaps greater benefit. But I'll leave that, if I may, in the notes section for our clerk this evening. Can I thank everyone for their contribution to that discussion? Can I thank Councillor Howard and Mr. Ellaby for their contribution as well? And can I confirm that the report and discussion are noted, colleagues? Gilly's raised her hand, so we'll pause that for a second. Gilly.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to say apologies to those people who are waiting for the other items, but we appear to have missed item 5C, which is the Treasury Management Outturn Report.
Oh dear.
If you wanted to go back and do that item, Chair.
I had 2 doses of councillor Roy. I couldn't cope with the third straight away, I'm afraid. But once we've actually noted this item, I'll return to 5C. And my apologies. I blame these 3 screens at my age, Gilly. So the last report is noted, colleagues, yes? Thank you.
Yeah.
I wasn't as far ahead as I thought I was, apparently. I now return to 5C, the very important Treasury Management Report. Have you remained, Councillor Rye?
Yes, I'm here.
I'm very grateful, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Paul. So this report covers the borrowing and investments of our cash balances and how they are compliant with the agreed Treasury Management Strategy and prudential indicators that we've set out earlier. So at the end of March, the council's borrowing portfolio totals 364.7 million. It was split just under 260 million with Public Work and Loan Board borrowing, 30 million in market loans, of which 20 million of those are LOBOs, and with 75 million on a zero-rated index-linked bond. So the average rate of borrowing was 2.71, which is 2.71%, which is slightly lower than the previous year, and it still remains historically low. And no new public loans and PWLB borrowing was undertaken during the last financial year. So, and largely, members will know that there was the government, or Treasury, basically decided that local authorities shouldn't borrow money from PWLB to purchase commercial property if the aim is solely to generate an income stream. So it had to have another benefit, if it's either for the local economy or for housing or something. The council issued a £63.8 million 50-year zero coupon instalment indexed redemption bond in November 2019, and the premium, it was yielding a total cash value of 75 million. The first instalment of half of that of the bond was issued, and it was paid to the council in November 2019, and the second instalment of just under 18.75 million was paid in November 2020. So it leaves us roughly leaves us around that amount. That final instalment was received in November 2021. So the current effective interest rate on that bond, on that borrowing, is just over 2%, 2.01%. And at the time that we took that bond out, the rate for a 50-year borrowing from PWLB was 3.05%. So it's considerably cheaper for us to borrow that way. And within Appendix A, you can look at the borrowing profile and the maturity of that profile of that bond. Lending, as of March of 2022, the council's investment portfolio amounted to 227.5 million. So that's cash and investment reserves. 20 million was invested in the long term, and 207.5 million was invested in short-term investments. This is the only time I'm probably going to miss Councillor Berlin, because he generally
How very harsh.
We had quite, I know, but he did have I wish he was here, because then we could talk about how investments work again. And so, for example, the CCLA investment, which we invested 20 million into, but more importantly, it's a return that we're seeing on it of just under, I think, a net return of just under over 3.5%. Its current value is 21.22 million. So again, from a 20 million pound investment, we're seeing a revenue return each year, but we're also seeing now that its capital value is worth 1.22 million above what we invested. Now, that doesn't give me any other joy other than the fact that that's what its value is, but I can't cash that in. It's an unrealized gain, as in the previous year it was an unrealized loss. So it just shows for members really that the point of this investment first was to provide us with an increased revenue, so we're basically putting into revenue, and it's helping to underpin our revenue budget. But the value will fluctuate over the time that we hold it. But the point is, in the worst of years, it had fallen by roughly 10%, but it's now worth roughly 12% above what we invested, or 6% above what we invested in it. And we've had the gain on it throughout the year. The average rate of return on the whole portfolio is 0.51%. So that's basically based on the fact that we're holding most of it in cash reserves because it needs to be liquid, because a lot of it is earmarked. And the investment portfolio is shown in Appendix B. And it shows that and again, it just confirms that our Treasury activities were undertaken and in accordance with our Treasury management strategy. And that the point here is, at the end of the outturn report, we've managed to increase our reserves by over £16 million, and it's a benefit it's showing of the way that we're holding the finances throughout the year, that we've managed to increase our reserves and I think make our council a bit more financially resilient. So that's me, Chair.
Thank you, sir. Are there any officer contributions? Who's riding shotgun today? Is it Maria or Jan, or?
You're still stuck with me, unfortunately, Chair.
Well, no, Ian. If I was to have anyone riding shotgun, it would be you, sir. So far away.
Bless you. It's. I think Councillor Ryan's covered all the pertinent points of the report anyway. So I'm riding shotgun for Councillor Ryan, really. But just to draw your attention to the conclusion of the report, that all that Treasury activity was carried out in accordance with the strategy and so on, which is the main assurance of this. the Treasury Management Strategy is probably the most scrutinised document that goes through the council, because it not only goes to overview, scrutiny panel, cabinet, but it also goes to governance and assurance for good measure. So I'm pleased to confirm that everything was done in accordance with constitutional arrangements and the strategy. In terms of investments, obviously we've had historically low returns on our cash investments, which is why things like the property bond have been an important strand, or would be a small part of our work there. And just really to preempt the re-asking of Councillor Rashid's question around internal borrowing, just point out in paragraphs 6.12 of the report, we're saying there that our internal borrowing at the end of the financial year was just shy of £110 million. So that's where we're using our surplus cash flows to avoid having to go to market to borrow for our capital programme, and using our own resources to fund that at the moment, whilst interest rates for investment side are so historically low. Once again, the reaction to the cost of living crisis is seeing some of those interest rates kick up. So in terms of our Treasury activities in the current year, we'll keep under advisement the sense in terms of using our surplus cash for internal borrowing. It may well be that we externalise some of that borrowing so we can invest surplus cash to actually generate a direct revenue return to the council. But that's part of our active Treasury management strategy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Zammit.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, very much on that theme, paragraph 6.12. I just wondered how the ratio of internal resource to external borrowing compares with other authorities, and what conclusions can we draw from this in terms of risk and financial efficiency?
Yeah, through you, I simply don't have that information to hand. I can certainly make inquiries and come back to your committee.
That would be fine, sir. A very good question, Councillor Zammit. I look forward to the response. Councillor Doddridge.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, when I was here last time, when there was a far larger Conservative group, I remember there was a lot of chat about this strategy being sort of casino politics and investing to bankrupt. And I just think it's great to see that the strategy is broadly working. I mean, there's still room for growth and room for improvement, as I'm sure Councillor Rye would concede, but to see broadly that the strategy is working year in, year out from that time almost 6 years ago fills me with a lot of satisfaction that we took the tough decisions at the right time, didn't go for an absolute cut approach, and invested in our borough and borrowed for our borough. And I'm glad to see that in the main it's paying off, and long may it continue.
Well, I've no wish, Councillor Doddridge, to reduce your satisfaction this evening, but I feel you're conflating two different conversations. I don't think there was any concern over the fact we invested large amounts of money with AAA rated financial institutions where the money was safe, given our skirting with Iceland many years ago. I think there was a discussion over the council's policy of borrowing money from the PWLB to buy commercial assets and to compete with commercial funds to buy commercial buildings, but that's not on tonight's agenda, so I won't go any further. But I think you're conflating slightly, sir, but nonetheless I agree with you that I think we do have a very good finance department who are both prudent and imaginative, and we're very grateful for that. Councillor Rye. Oh, Councillor Rye's hand has gone.
Well, just one thing, Chair. So part of this, this is Treasury management. So part of this does include things like the commercial investment, and again, you know, the commercial investment is we can get a further report on this, and feel free to call in property for this. But it's held up really well even through the pandemic. The returns from the people who are holding leases on those commercial investments has held up very well, and the capital value has shown an appreciable increase as well, because we've seen them being revalued and actually offers coming in as considerably higher than we invested in, 4 or 5 years ago. So we've weathered the storm of COVID so far very well in our commercial activity, and we haven't really seen what other local authorities in some cases have seen, where they've seen loss of income, because it's also about what you're what the market that you're trading in. So if we, for example, all of ours are kind of large, for example, furniture in the Beckton Triangle, to give an example, and it's less of a market where you're going completely online. People do go online for it, but it's still one of these areas where people want to see and feel the product. So they're still seeing themselves being good. Well, basically for us, good leaseholders. So it has seen that difference, and I think if we're going to be fair, there was the CCLA was an example of a concern, because your not predecessor, but the deputy leader did seem to have an issue with us having to write down debt. He wanted to write down losses which hadn't been realised, which was ridiculous. And I think that's the thing, and it's for the same reason which we're not including the value of it having on our balance sheet as a cash amount of a cashable. We're not doing that either with it when it's risen, because as you know probably better than maybe him, was that you only realise these losses and gains when you cash the investment in. So it's pointless kind of writing it down on your balance sheet either way.
Well, you make an excellent point. I mean, the property companies, their shares trade at a premium if their assets are actually greater than their book value, and vice versa.
Yeah.
I do know of a council in England who bought a shopping centre for 120 million pounds. It's now worth 60 million pounds, but that loss hasn't been realised as it hasn't been sold. And they'll do it differently. And as a councillor and as a resident and as a ratepayer, I hope and pray that we continue to be in positive territory. I also appreciate the aim behind it was to generate an income to fund services, and it's a balancing act. And let's hope that once again our finance department continue to manage it well and continue to keep us in green ink rather than red ink, Ian. In fact, can I urge you, Cam, to ban all red ink going forward? Right, I have a question from Councillor Rashid. Councillor Rashid.
Thank you very much, Chair. I also do admit that, this currently, based on many crises, the pandemic, 2.5 years, and the war, council officers skillfully and with their experience, and also definitely with the leaders, Judge Atwal and our finance man, and they are doing very well. If I see, for example, small businesses, what I have read and what I have seen from this reading the documents, the council is helping with the grants. Council is also helping reducing their business rate if anybody wants to set up this small business. Council also helping, if they recruit local people, they will be giving trainings, the free of charge, and the other, the support. So that's how we can see these mini businesses they set up, and they are doing very well. I do appreciate that. And what can I say? Thank you very much to the officers and also the finance person, Camry, and the leader, Judge Atwal. Thank you.
I'm sure they're all very grateful for your support, Catherine. Thank you very much indeed. And if I may, can I confirm that report and discussion are noted, colleagues?
Noted. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Hopefully we're now back on track, Julie. I do apologise having upset your paperwork there. I believe the next item is 5E, the Affordable Housing Programme, and I believe we have the pleasure of Councillor Solanki to present the report. Councillor Solanki, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members as well. In July 2020, Cabinet approved the second phase of the Affordable Homes Programme, and work started across 9 sites in March 2021 to deliver 282 new homes. This report provides an update on the progress of the delivery of the programme and seeks member approval on the agreement of the next phase of the programme, taking into consideration the impacts already being felt by phase 2 with escalating inflation, labour shortages, and exploring wider opportunities across the council. Phase 1 includes 126 new homes, of which 78 new homes have been successfully delivered, with another 48 underway at Marlion Road, currently under construction. Phase 2 contains 282 new homes funded mainly through HRA borrowing and GLA grant. We have successfully started on-site at Budot Court, Heathcote Court, and Glade Court and Shakespeare Square. And to get the best value, we have decided to reprocure for Torrington Road and Waller's Close. The team are undertaking a market engagement process to generate interest in those 3 sites. Apart of those, the overall pipeline, we also have a small sites programme, and that is being delivered by the Housing Asset Management Service. And we are also exploring other options. The council previously was looking for a registered provider partner for the affordable units at Clements Road and Loxford Lane when they were Redbridge living sites. However, obviously, to resolve the obligation attached to GLA-funded Iceland site purchase, the GLA is now happy to fulfil site obligation with the HRA purchasing the 55 affordable rent units across Clements Road and Loxford Road, alongside an additional 11 street purchases. So the 55 units across those 2 sites will contribute to just under a third of the target of 168 new homes in the next phase. So this is just an update of where we are now, what we hope to do in the coming months, and yeah, happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, any questions or comments to Councillor Slanky? Councillor Hussain, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vanisha, for doing a really hard job. It's not an easy job. It's not just us, we are struggling with meeting the targets. The whole council are meeting, having problem with meeting the target. But my problem is, my question is regarding the cost element. It has already gone up significantly from probably 134 million to 201 million. And there are other factors beyond your control, like we were promised a lot of good things, if once we left the Brexit, we will do a lot of good things, but it's not happening, unfortunately. And now the other thing beyond your control, like war in Ukraine, and the cost of living is at a record level. Would you be able to meet the target in the near future?
Councillor.
Thank you for your question. I think that's a really good question. I think, we are really facing tough times at the moment, incredibly, volatile parts in terms of what's happening with the prices. I think, it costs more to buy property it costs less to buy a property off the market than actually to build. And I think that just shows the element of what we're facing with. I think you're right. I think COVID plays a part, Brexit plays a part, we have labour shortages, and we can't forget about the war as well. And I think, that's why we're seeing an increase in costs. But what we're doing, as I outlined, is a market engagement exercise to generate interest in those sites and make sure that we are getting making sure we're getting the best price for those sites. And Paul, if you want to come in as well, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So we've had the
Paul, say who you are, please, Paul.
Sorry, my name's Paul Shaffer. I'm the program director in charge of the HRA program. So just to answer your question, we've had the perfect storm, if we're being honest. We've had Brexit, COVID, a war, and now we've got a cost of living crisis with the fuel and energy costs going up. So we've gone back out for Little Geary's, Suffolk Court and Avenue Court to test the market back out, because we entered into a 2-stage contract whilst before I arrived. It come back, it means that we've got one contractor pricing for the job after the exercise. So we got a price back in, we wasn't happy with it, so we've gone back out to test the market, and hopefully we've had a lot of interest in our contracts actually on an open tender. So previously we went through a framework, now we've gone on open, so it's open to anyone to bid for it. And actually we've had quite a lot of interest in it. So we'll see how the picture sort of plays itself out. But the 2nd of August, we get all the prices back for everything. So we'll know where we are budget wise around that time. So I should be able to come back in September Cabinet with an update report to sort of say, this is where we are with our programme, and make some key decisions at that point.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Zammit.
Yes, I was going to mention that point. It's the increase in costs, isn't it, and the impact that has on our programme, and fully appreciate all the comments that have been made. And let's hope this new open approach does lead to a better financial result for us. Although I did wonder a little bit whether, so much public discussion of this was really helpful in terms of us positioning ourselves with tenderers, but that's a separate matter. But I wanted to pick up as well on paragraph 3.4, relationship with the Mayor's office, because I thought that was a really positive thing that came out of this report, that the relationship with the Mayor's office is as good as it is. And I just wonder if you could say, whoever, Venetia or Paul, tell us a little bit more about relationship with the Mayor's office and how that might help us in terms of achieving grants in the future, and also, I guess, things around planning consent and so on. So the floor's yours, guys.
You happy for me to answer that, Venetia?
Yes, happy for you to answer that.
So
am I.
So I arrived sort of in March last year, and since I've been here, I've sort of picked up the mantle from where I come across from Brent, and I've been talking to the GLA now for about 5 years, and there was a few things to sort out at Redbridge. So we've managed this. This is the last bit, taking the units out of Clements and Loxford, and sort of applying that in exchange for the Iceland site. So essentially, those units now mean that we free up the Iceland site. So the Iceland site has no obligation attached to it for the council. So it can be a commercial site if it needs to be. But now the kind of slate is sort of cleared with the GLA. They're happy to fund stuff going forward. They're very comfortable with sort of being open, having open conversations, I don't tell them any lies or hide anything from them, and they appreciate that. So that's sort of gone a long way. So, and they're coming for a site visit to come around our HRA site shortly. So we're trying to plan that at the moment. So I'm trying to bring them into the borough and make them interested in Redbridge, because I think there's a lot of potential here. So hopefully the groundwork's been done, and hopefully it moves forward in a much stronger grant funding position going forward.
Okay, that's terrific. But what about the open discussion and my concerns about how that would affect the attitude of tenderers?
So we are having open market discussions across the whole of London at the moment, because this is a real big issue for all councils. So all London councils are in meetings that are coordinated by London councils and Future London, and the GLA are involved in those, because the price per square metre 4 years ago was roughly around £2,800, and at the moment it's fluctuating across boroughs from £3,000 to £5,500 a square metre. So we're trying to help each other out at the moment around what we're doing to try and bring the cost of stuff down. So
okay, thank you, Chair.
Paul. You made a very interesting remark just then. You said you joined us from Brent's and you've rebuilt the relationship, and you said, I don't lie to them, I don't hide things from them. That suggests somebody has lied and hid. What's happened in the past, Paul?
No, there's no skeletons in the cupboard. It's just fostering a kind of open approach when it comes to sort of deadlines and start and site dates, etc., etc. That there's no skeletons.
So why would you say, sir, I don't lie to them, I don't hide things from them? Where's that phrase come from?
Oh, sorry, that's probably my poor English, if I'm being perfectly honest. It's probably the wrong turn of phrase.
I think you speak better English than me, Paul. I think that's a very interesting remark you've made there, and I thank you for the response. Councillor Martin Sachs, over to you, sir.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Solanke, for your presentation. And first of all, I'll repeat points I've made previously at this committee, that I very much welcome the Council's very strong commitment to public sector housing, to providing affordable and social housing, because we've got a staggering amount of need in this borough, and unfortunately, sorry, Councillor Canal, but unfortunately previous administrations haven't provided in this area to the extent that we are still the lowest provider of social housing in London, and we really do need to remedy that going forward. So I'm very pleased that we're doing this now, and we must go forward and expand going forward. I do have a concern about one item in the report, which is Little Geary's. It does seem quite shocking that a tender that was supposed to come in at 31 million came in at 39 million. So I think I think the point that was made was that this was dealt with via a framework basis rather than an open tender basis. But a discrepancy of that sort is still quite shocking, and I think you need to look at the way these schemes are pre-estimated. And I have a particular concern about Little Geary's, because obviously this means there is a delay. Yet on site at Little Geary's, anybody who regularly drives along Cranbrook Road will know that the big block containing 20 flats has been cleared. The residents have been moved out, and that block has been boarded up, and it's obviously going to sit there until we manage to get a successful tender and we manage to get a start on site. And I really don't like to see these sort of programming glitches which are so apparent to the public. And I would like an assurance that every one of those residents has been rehoused in accommodation that's at least as good as that they've been moved out, and that none have been put into temporary accommodation. So if I could have some assurances on those points, I would be most grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Councillor, sorry, Councillor Canal.
Who's this?
Councillor Sachs. So it's Councillor Carol Hinvest. I'm the Operational Director of Housing. Councillor Canal.
Thank you very much. A superb interjection there. I thought perhaps you were somebody else who just hacked into our meeting there. So please carry on.
Apologies, Chair. I didn't mean to give you that impression. Councillor Sachs, one of the things that we didn't say earlier was that one of the ways we've tried to reduce the cost of the contract going forward and to deal with the point that you've just made is the demolition has been removed. So you don't have to wait for the new full tender to be completed for the demolition. The demolition works has been tendered separately. And Paul, I only came back from leave today, so Paul will update me as to when that is going to take place. But that was specifically taken out so that could be speeded up and you wouldn't have to wait for a new contractor to mobilise. The other reason it was taken out is because it's not necessarily something that the prime house building contractors are good at. So they tend to overprice on the areas that are not in their remit. They're just going to sub it out anyway. So they take their cut off the top and then they sub it out. So so that's been tendered. Somebody has won the contract, and Paul will now interject smoothly to tell us when that's going to happen.
A smooth interjection, please, Paul. Show Carol how it's done.
So the works have been carried out. So the block is in the process of being demolished, and the site's being hoarded as we speak. And we are due to have the contractor, the main contractor, back on site at the end of September. So the transition period between the demolition work and the main contractor work starting is quite a short period of time. It's probably 4 or 5 weeks.
And on your other point, Councillor Sachs, everybody was rehoused. Nobody went into temporary accommodation.
Thank you.
Right, I'll now take Councillor Mahmood, then Councillor Zamet, and then Councillor Durrett. Then I'll stop chat on this item. So Councillor Mahmood, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Solanki, for leading the housing, sort of programs, successful housing programs. I just wanted to mention here that in Clayhall Road, near the roundabout, the Red House has been passaged by Gulliad Home. We had an initial meeting with the director of Gulliad Home, and also they had a resident consultation. What we gather, so they're hoping to build about 164 units, mixed units, and they said they're monitoring the investment. So what I wanted to ask, whether actually council, would help Gulliad Home to speed up the process. And I wanted, sort of to get some views, from yourself, Councillor Solanki, and also from the officer Thank you.
Through you, Chair.
Please.
Thank you, Councillor Mahmood. Unfortunately, this has got nothing to do with the report that we're talking about this evening, the Affordable Homes Programme update. Unfortunately, it's got nothing to do with
In
that.
fact, I should have spotted that, so I do apologise. You raise a very interesting point, Councillor Mahmood. Can I suggest that you write to the member, relevant housing member, and she can respond to you directly. I've forgotten the draconian rules that were imposed about 8 years ago to stop us having broader conversations. So, Councillor Solanke, I apologise, and Councillor Mahmood, if you put your question in writing, I have no doubt you'll receive a fulsome reply inside 35 days. I think that's the average time now. Councillor Doddridge.
Thank you, Chair. Though I don't doubt that your namesake may have a better command of English than yourself, I don't think he was making a comparison statement at all. And I think actually what we're talking about is a renewal of the relationship with the mayor. So we continue to build on that relationship. Not that anybody has lied to them before, but this is a statement that we have an upfront and honest and frank relationship with the mayor's office. And that's always been the Redbridge way. So I'm not sure why Paul was put on trial after his answer, but it wasn't a comparison statement at all, and I'm not quite understood why you saw it in those terms.
Well, let me explain then, Councillor Doddridge. We are aware that there was a freezing of relationships with the mayor's office. There was a misunderstanding over a project. We know that, and we are aware there's been a thawing. And I thought the phrase he used was interesting. And I'm grateful that we're now in a positive position going forward, and I hope that continues. But
by we, sorry, Chair, by we, who do you mean?
I mean we as a council, sir. But I appreciate your interjection as always, Councillor Doddridge.
Thank you.
As there are no further comments on that report, can I pose a question to Councillor Solanke, please? Some time ago, we had a vehicle called Redbridge Living that was designed to do this sort of work, but things changed, and we appreciate things did change. And their March 2020 accounts showed debts of 3.5 million and net worth of 451k. And in March 2021, there are no assets and no debt. I appreciate you can't answer the question now, but could I ask you to go away and come back and let me know what happened to the booked loss on the balance sheet of 451k, how we dealt with that? Or should I email the question to you? Would that be easier?
Yeah, if you could, Councillor Canal, that would be helpful. But am I right in thinking that's a Redbridge Living question and not a...
Or it's about housing, affordable housing in Redbridge. So I'm stretching the boundaries here, Councillor Solanke, as I can occasionally, but I will write to you.
Yeah.
Members, is it agreed that those reports are noted and the comments are noted?
Noted.
Agreed.
Can I thank Councillor Solanke, and can I thank Carol Hinvest for her involvement as well? Greatly appreciated. Item 5F, the Redbridge Corporate Plan. I'm delighted to welcome our leader, Councillor Atwell. I'm sorry it's taken so late, Councillor Atwell, or so long, I should say. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Canal. And no, it's actually been very interesting listening to the debate, so no apologies needed. I thoroughly enjoyed today's overview committee meeting. We come to the Redbridge Corporate Plan 2022 to 2026. It's basically a live document of all the aims and aspirations and the work that we will carry out over the next 4 years. It's built on the engagement and research with residents, engagement with staff and our partners, and of course, engagement with our elected representatives. It is a plan for Redbridge, and of course, it carries the manifesto of the administration for which we got the largest mandate at the last election on May the 5th of any political party in the history of Redbridge Council. It contains commitments from us, the administration, and our priorities for all the various service areas across the whole of the council. And of course, the major strategies of our organisation provide a guide as to what we want for the future of the borough to be. And of course, the aim is to simply make Redbridge a great place for everyone. This means tackling poverty, overcoming the cost of living crisis, and of course helping Redbridge emerge from the impacts of the pandemic and the COVID effects on people, the COVID effects on our communities and our businesses, and of course we've still got the spectre of war and Brexit looming over our over the horizon for Redbridge. We also make the commitment here in the longer term future of Redbridge, and will end child poverty by 2040. That's our commitment, and see all our areas across Redbridge no longer be categorised as deprived. The way we work with residents is important. There will be a very strong emphasis on prevention, collaboration, and of course responsibility. We have many strong examples of this way of working. From the early years work we do, the collaboration with health and the police, or the emphasis on keeping Redbridge clean and tackling ASB through initiatives like the Wall of Shame. We will do even more over the next 4 years as we go through. As we know, the council delivers over 400 different types of services. So the plan needs structure. We built it around 4 core themes. The first one is safe and healthy. As part of our crime commission, we have a comprehensive plan, including the rollout of the enforcement hub, a police hub on the Orchard Estate in the Woodford area. We now have a larger police team in Ilford than before. We will also commit to more CCTV, noise control 24/7, and teams to keep our parks safe as well. The impact of COVID continues, and we're looking to address major health inequalities with wide variances in life expectancy and above average levels of range of health issues. Our commitment to becoming a UNICEF child-friendly borough will be a major priority to achieve by 2026, as we want to be truly inclusive borough for all young people. The second theme is clean and green. We'll expand Fairlock Waters. We have improved facilities in Hainault Forest, create more parks and open spaces. Our climate change action plan focuses on organisations' ability to reduce its carbon footprint, and we will do more to address the wider implications on our environment over the next decade. We have plans to improve flood prevention, to develop cleaner air around our schools, invest in more electric charging points. We'll plant thousands of trees and commit to biodiversity plan and a sustainable transport strategy. Residents tell us that tackling waste and litter is a major issue. We'll increase our recycling and do more to tackle fly tipping as we come out of contracts that we've been shackled to for over the last 20 odd years. Third theme is jobs and skills. We're committed to the Work Redbridge programme and working with the Redbridge Institute to help adults find the right pathways to employment. A partnership with New City College and our commitment to a university campus means Redbridge will be an amazing place to learn. I make that pledge. We want to have a Russell Group University having a campus here in Redbridge, a absolute certainty, so that we can make sure that we not only have great schools, but right the way through the full cycle, we will have a proper Russell Group University here in Redbridge. Maybe not the whole thing, but certainly campuses as a starting point. And we will continue we're committed to supporting local businesses to sustain and grow. We will also develop a longer term voluntary and community sector strategy. I was listening very keenly to the conversation earlier. We have over 350 voluntary sector organisations that we work with. And yes, we do need to fund more. We need to give them more responsibility because we can get more bang for our buck if we work with them. But this is again with the diminishing pot of money, and finding that pot of money. There is no magic money tree, and we'll try and eke out every penny. And I was also interested in the conversation earlier about investment, how a shopping centre was bought by some council and now it's less than half its value or around half its value. We did something similar, but I know we've been offered millions more, but because it's bringing us revenue generation, you know, we'll take that revenue income as opposed to a single one-off receipt, and we will work towards that into the future. And then we've got homes and neighbourhood as our final theme: build more social housing and more affordable housing. With a landlord licensing scheme, we will ensure people are treated fairly, will improve the quality of housing for everyone, regardless of tenure. Our new community hubs are based across the borough, providing excellent facilities, supports and services. We will develop these in partnership with local people. We will create the right approaches according to the issues that matter most locally. We recognise that being able to make real change, we also need to make more noise about Redbridge. This means we need to be fighting for more resources, encouraging new businesses to move here, make Redbridge a centre of education excellence, including, as I said earlier, a new university campus. It is a plan, not only just the university campus. You know, we've talked about Mercato, but I'm really hopeful that this October, November, that it'll finally be open along with the Royal Nawab restaurant underneath the Cineworld, to make sure that we have the right ambience in Ilford, so that we can, as residents across the borough, can reclaim our rightful space right next to the Kenneth More Theatre, which is still flourishing despite all the scare stories that it would be closed down. And of course, we have the appendices in the report, which lists out all the key activity against the themes and safe and healthy activities. Then, of course, we've got our key plans and strategies, like the Redbridge Crime Commission, the health and well-being strategy, the tobacco control strategy, the suicide prevention strategy, the substance misuse strategy, violence against women and girls and domestic abuse strategy, and of course the social care market sustainability strategy. We'll use all these documents, which will feed into the corporate plan, to make sure that we certainly have a really, you know, a borough that we can be proud of, a borough that we want to live in. This is, like I said, a live document, and it will be changing as time goes on, as priorities. Some of them will come to the fore more, some will perhaps be achieved, and we will keep looking at this document, something I want all the senior corporate leadership team to really have with them at all times, because this is the ambition, this is the manifesto, this is the mandate that the people of Redbridge gave to this administration, and will work very hard in the 4 years to deliver this. Thank you, sir.
Leader, thank you for a very thorough presentation there. We're very grateful indeed. Can I turn to members? Any comments or questions, please, from members? Councillor Zammit, I've not heard you for a while. How are you, sir? Are you well? Are you there, Councillor Zammit? Are you on mute?
Yeah, I'm pretty well. Camera on as well now. Thank you.
Well done, sir. Your question and your comment, sir.
So, okay, so I think it's a great document. I think it covers a huge area, and I think it's absolutely spot on. And I'm very grateful to the leader and chief executive for producing it. I've just got a couple of points to make, really. The first is on page 12. It talks about the underfunding of the voluntary sector, and I rest my case on that. I've probably spoken about that 3 times tonight, but it's great to see that it's reflected in the corporate plan. We're all agreed on that. On page 14, there is this statement around life expectancy, which is a particularly tricky issue for Redbridge, because we have huge discrepancies between the south of the borough, where life expectancy is relatively short, and the north and west of the borough, where life expectancy is above the average. One of my colleagues, who will remain nameless, said to me once, well, if we move the population of Loxford to Monkham's, would that mean their life expectancy increased? And I said, well, it doesn't actually quite work that way, Philly. You know, you have to think about it more in terms of social factors. But it still remains a big challenge for us. And I think it's great
that wasn't quite nameless, Councillor Zammit. Never mind.
Sorry, I must have slipped. But you know, we can all see that you know, stark contrast between Loxford, for example, Clementswood, indeed Valentine's and so on, and the north and west of the borough in terms of life expectancy. And I think perhaps it would be helpful if we saw this document as the overview document underpinned by other strategies, because the risk is that we say, well, it says all these things, they're motherhood and apple pie, whereas the reality is these are sitting on top of some quite well worked out strategies, which we've really worked very hard on over a longer period of time. And my final point really would be on timescale, because it's 5 years ahead. And I think maybe we ought to be thinking a bit about 10 years ahead, because you know, 5 years in my mind is really the end of the operational planning cycle. 10 years ahead is the strategic planning cycle. So maybe there's room here for us at a future date to have an additional section which says, well, what's it going to look like in 10 years' time? How are we going to make this work in 10 years' time, rather than just dealing with the 5-year horizon? So that's my contribution. Thank you very much, Chair.
Leader, what are your thoughts on those comments?
No, I think the comments that Councillor Zammit makes are always spot on. I think the fact that the life expectancy points he makes, I think it is to do with a lot of investment and making sure we have the facilities available, the education and the leisure facilities to make sure that people have the opportunity at an earlier age to engage, and we're certainly working towards that. And you know, and that doesn't mean that suddenly we're going to uplift Loxford and move it to Monkham's, but I think what we have to do is bring some of those facilities that are available north of the borough. But we're very privileged and lucky that we have, you know, Fairlock Waters, we have Wanstead Park, we have the City of London on our doorstep, we have Hainault Forest, but of course that does border the areas of Wanstead, Woodford and Monkham's rather than Loxford, Clementswood and Goodmayes. So I think what we have to do is work doubly hard. The last point that Councillor Zammit makes, I think, is spot on. We do need a tangible sort of delivery targets, because as they say that, you know, politicians' lifespan in the political arena is about 4 years, and we want to make sure that we deliver something. But what Neil says, Councillor Zammit says about a 10-year strategy, something corporate is spot on. There should be a longer term view, which we will certainly look on adding to that, because I think it's a very sound suggestion. But equally, what we have to do is keep an eye on the delivery, because I don't want to be so forward thinking that in 10, 15 years time, none of us are here, officers or politicians, and none of it's been achieved. At least by stating it for over the next 4 years, what we've actually got is, you know, responsibility and the ability to really deliver some of those promises that we have made. I'm sure, you know, I don't want to be in a place where in 2027 we're still waiting for a Lido or a climbing centre or something of that ilk, and Wanstead swimming pool is just being delivered. I want Wanstead swimming pool delivered. That's a tangible outcome, operational, as Councillor Zammit puts it. And also I want the Lido done and dusted long before the next election, and we need to deliver those things. But we are, you know, having to swim against the tide here, because there are, you know, these mitigating factors on Brexit and labour and costs and inflation, the cost of living. And of course, there are things that we will have to tackle as well. And that is going to consume a lot of our time, effort, and of course, that very valuable commodity called money, which we're in short supply.
Thank you, sir. Can I call on Councillor Martin Sachs, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Leader, for your presentation. And I just want to say I agree with all of the points that Councillor Zammit just made, and I believe this this document really is a vote of confidence in our borough and is truly ambitious for Redbridge. Obviously, there's a little reference there to manifestos that quite a lot of us were putting through letterboxes only a few weeks ago, and I think one of the most ambitious and imaginative promises was the idea of bringing a major university campus into the borough. I'd like to know if there are any initial thoughts as to where that might be sited. I would also like to add the point, quite a lot has been said about housing earlier in this meeting and in the leader's presentation about housing, and one of those elements is going to need to be student housing, and can we make sure that that point is not lost? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sachs. Leader.
Thank you. And I think, like I said, Councillor Sachs, I agreed with everything Councillor Zammit said, because Councillor Zammit always does make good sense. So I think we're all on the same page. And I think I wish I could announce the university, and I think I probably can, but I need to check if the documents are being signed. And until the chief exec is, shaking her head in like, no, don't you dare. But we are close, and I think it's a case of wait and see. I know exactly where it's going to go, but we have to, it's that suspense, and perhaps next overview I'll try and come and reveal that, or if I can, Councillor Sachs will do that before. It is something really exciting, because I do think we have this really good sort of reputation of a place where people want to move with their young families because they want the education. What we have to do as an administration, as a council, is how do we keep those people here after they've graduated? And the way to do that is to give them the job opportunity to be able to call some of the best students from across the country and the world, to be able to see, there aren't many boroughs. We knock it because we live here. There aren't many boroughs which can really showcase some of the facilities that we have on our doorstep. People travel a long way to come see some of those things. And some of the things that Councillor Rice got planned in the leisure and culture portfolio is certainly going to make a lot of people sit up and take notice and come here from miles around, because this is a place, where we want people to come and spend their time and money, and of course drop their anchor and set up a family home, so that we can actually have the generations in the future, perhaps enjoy some of the times that I've enjoyed here, and a lot of you have enjoyed here.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Duddridge.
Thank you, Chair. And yet again, it's great to hear the good news about the things we're building. I mean, the manifesto was called Ambitious for Redbridge. I wondered whether one of our ambitions moving forward could be that we are one of the few London boroughs without a single professional sports club. We are building a lot of superb facilities for sports clubs in the areas of all stripes and different sports. Can one of the ambitions be, and one of the outcomes, that we support these clubs to be competing at the best level that they can be as well?
Leader.
Thank you. I think I would really love that to happen. Somebody who played sport competitively for many years of my life, I think it's something that everybody should get the opportunity to enjoy. And if I take football, because that was my love, I just sometimes feel we have so many teams here, but what we really want is just one of them to break through to the next level and the level above. And when you see teams like Salford City bankrolled by the team of 91. I wish Dudridge and co would bankroll one of the local teams here to strive for that. And I certainly think that we have a rich history, whether it's athletics. If you go down to Cricklefields, you'll see Dalton Grant, the ex-Olympic high jumper. You go to Ashton's, you'll see someone like Fatima Whitbread, the ex-Olympic. I can't remember if she's Olympic champion or a world champion, but Sally Gunner, who trained there. It's the ability to, the old story of Kevin Costner. If you build it, they will come. And certainly we're doing the right things, but we do need investment. I think that's where people like Julian's team come in to showcase that a lot can be done and how we can do it. We will certainly do that. And I think putting that as an ambitious sort of a thing, Julian, I think this is something we should look at, because it will inspire generations of children to really look into how they could perhaps not look into Leyton Orient or West Ham or Tottenham down the road, but something of our own. The athletics is going on at the moment. It's almost unheard of, but what we want is create something great, whether it's that or even, little known fact is that Essex is, hotbed of Essex cricketers is Redbridge. Most of their 70% of their cricketers have come from Redbridge. We are an absolute, hotbed of cricket for Essex and England, and how we can make use of that. And I think those are the kind of commitments we need to aspire to, because if we can do that, we will have an amazing borough, and we will have amazing people, children who can dream to be like their heroes they see, not just only on telly, but playing down the road. So I agree, Councillor Dudley. Perhaps we need to look into that.
Thank you, sir. And of course, I'm sure you would also include leader rugby. We have 4 very good rugby teams playing at a very high level in this borough.
Absolutely.
And indeed, we've actually produced England players, and we've also produced an England women's rugby player. And on a Sunday morning, over 2,000 children under 16 play rugby in this borough. And I think any sport any young person plays is to be commended. Councillor Hussain, your comment or question, please, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Leader. It's a truly transformative piece of strategy. I'm really pleased that that we are not only working on the elimination of child poverty, but we are also trying to get rid of the deprived areas. And hopefully, we won't be known as deprived areas in Chelmsford or Laxford ward. And thank you very much for providing a positive leadership to get rid of all these bad points and providing the equality access to each and everyone in the borough, and getting a playing level field. I'm wondering, Leader, would you qualify for some extra funds, because you're trying to get rid of child poverty and trying to getting rid of the deprived areas from the government under levelling up scheme?
Thank you, Councillor Hussain. I think you raised some really valuable points, because sometimes we strive to do something so special that we sometimes forget the bread and butter stuff. And certainly I know Clementswood and Loxford won't be left behind, and we will certainly be looking into how parts of the South will certainly be developed so that deprivation, being on the lower quartile of the indices for deprivation, Redbridge is no longer represented on that. That is our dream, and that is what we will make happen. What we will look into in terms of the levelling up fund, I know Julian and his team with Mahbub have been working up on a bid which is supported by the LGA. I believe it's for £20 million, Julian, which we're trying to go for, and we will certainly try and see that every bit of an opportunity that comes, we will take it. I mean, I was stunned a few years ago when we had these £6 million for the HL F Heritage Lottery funding. It's called something else now. I know it's called something else, just can't remember what it's called. But we got the funding, and I spoke to the Heritage Lottery people, and I said, like, so who gets the funding almost every year? And they named a borough, and they said, oh, they get the funding every year. And I said, well, why is that? They said, oh, they apply every year. And since then, we've just applied for everything. And we make sure that you've got to be in it to win it. And certainly, you know, there are some really good news to come on and things like cricket and tennis. Again, these are bits of news that we're working on. You know, when we're talking about eliminating deprivation, we're talking about investment in our borough, investment into sport, investment into tennis, into cricket. And of course, you know, it would be great if we could bring Essex County Cricket Club back to Redbridge, even if it is for that solitary 1 week, which they used to come and play here. They used to play one of their league matches here and a couple of their one-day matches. And if we can achieve that, then I think it will certainly bring Redbridge back in to that sporting sort of elite sport sort of coming here will certainly drive some of our youngsters to aspire to be like their heroes. But a great question. I think wards like Clements Wood and Loxford and even Valentine's, Hainault, really sort of the investment we need to put in there, we will do so because I don't like it when I see, you know, I look at the deprivation index and I see those wards in there every time. And you know, we've got to do something about it. We can't just wish it away. We actually have to invest in there, and we will do so, Councillor Hussain. Thank you
very much, Leader.
Thank you, Leader. If we do attract Essex, will the Leader open the batting for a Redbridge All-Stars side?
That'd be worth watching.
I don't think I want to get picked against the councillors team against the mayor's 11.
Councillor Doubtford, are you seeking a second bite of the cherry, sir?
Well, just to build on some of these questions, because I feel like the committee is in agreement that this is something that we should pursue and is a real ambition for the borough. I wondered whether we could get sort of 6-month report from officers on the progress of our sports clubs in the borough, so we know who's doing well, so we know how our money's being spent, and we will know who needs a bit of TLC and which clubs are excelling as well, all across our great borough.
And perhaps that could include the sports clubs themselves about what they need to survive, firstly, because they're facing increased costs, and to thrive.
Yeah.
Julie, is that something we can actually look at in the future?
I can certainly make a note of that, Chair, and confirm that through the work programme, if you like. Yes.
I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Leader, can I ask you a couple of questions, make a couple of points? Clearly, this report's been produced to be positive and to be ambitious, as your colleagues have said. And I refer you to page 108, when it says that 9 in 10 residents say they feel safe during the day in the local area. As he and I know, because we were involved in the same silent walk, not everyone feels the same way at night, and certainly parts of our community are very concerned in the evening. And in the same graphic, it says that 3 out of 4 people will be here in 3 years' time. That suggests 25% want to leave. What else do you think we need to do? Well, firstly, on the safety side, I think we're now in the upper decile for murders in the borough, rather unfortunately, over the last 18 months. What else do we need to do? What else can we do to make our residents feel safe and indeed to keep them safe and make them want to stay here?
Thank you. I think I'll pick up on that last point first in terms of people wanting to stay here. One of the things I've always been honest about is that this is an amazing place for people to come in and bring their children here. And once the children get educated, one of the first things that they do, and this is not something that's happened in the last 5 years, 6 years, 8 years. This has been the history of Redbridge over the last 20, 30 years. They get educated and the children move away and they set up home somewhere else. And I think this is a survey which basically concluded what we already knew. And what we have to do is reverse that trend. And the way to reverse that trend is to give the opportunities. Now, when you look around the borough, I said earlier on in the briefing that we want a borough which has got all the things like upgraded Fairlock Waters, upgraded Hainault Forest, and we've got the green spaces, and of course we've got Ashton's, we've got the town centre with Mercato and the restaurant coming in, the university. What we have to do is make sure that people understand we've got to sell our borough a lot better than that we've done in the past. And by doing it better, I mean getting the best out of what we have and making sure that we're looking into the future and delivering for our residents. Now, in terms of safety, absolutely agree. I looked at that and you know, I turned cold because what's happened in the last month is a reality, is a fact. And that's why tomorrow afternoon, the chief executive and I are both meeting the borough commander. And in the morning, I'm talking to the deputy mayor for crime and policing, Sophie Linden, for more resources. Our CCTV cameras, we're looking to improve them even more. They're second to none as we speak, because, you know, some of the tragic things that have happened, in some cases have led us literally to the door of where the perpetrators of those heinous crimes were. And, you know, and that's working closely with the police. My anger sometimes is that I don't want my police solving crimes that have happened. I want my police being visible and deterring people to commit those crimes. And whilst it's all too easy for me to say we need more police numbers, because we do, and it would be great if I had any control over them, as residents sometimes like to believe. What we will do is work closely with the borough commander, we will work closely with the Mayor of London, we will work closely with the government to making sure that the resources we need, we will get. I know I asked for more resources, we got them, but I don't want them in the short term. I'm asking our borough commander to make sure that we make the representations to deliver the numbers that we perhaps require, whether it's on a gangs matrix, whether it's about knife crime, whether it's about the killings that we've had, to make sure that we make a case for more resources, and we will continue to do so. What we mustn't do is basically feel scared in the light of what's happened, because this is a place we all call home. We live here, and we're certainly not going to be driven out because of what's happened. What we will do is work with our partnerships, with our partners, and we will deliver a safe place for everyone to live. Now, the survey which delivers that is an independently conducted survey, which I think gives some really good figures for what we as a council are doing, and we will continue to do that. But, sir, I take your point, especially when so many people feel safe. There are some things that have happened in the last month, which, you know, I just cannot explain. And police officers with much more experience than me are just left baffled. They can't explain either. And what we have to do is make sure that our street lighting, our enforcement hubs, our visible enforcement teams are everywhere. But we are fighting, obviously, like I said before, the resources, which is finances, to deliver those things we can do properly. But if we can have more police, we'll be knocking on the door of the mayor and of the government as soon as we can. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that response, and I wish you luck in those discussions. I'll take one final contribution before I close this item from Councillor Rashid. Councillor Rashid, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. and thank you very much, leader, that your comprehensive presentation. I know that we have achieved a lot. You know, that I can see from 2010 to till today, the difference. Even Loxford Ward is actually benefited with many improvement. But there are many complaints about the crime. This is growing now. Especially the residents are, you know, especially the women are complaining that they are not safe during nighttime, especially even daytime in the, you know, in mid-afternoon. What I'm trying to say that, you know, is it these for safety, you know, for safety, for women's safety, there are many other borough, you know, especially our neighboring borough, having safer transport team. They are actually providing free of charge wrist alarm for women. So, you know, this is it any way possible? Can council initiate this for this wrist alarm, you know, for vulnerable ladies, those who actually go, you know, go out at night, you know, or they have got shift work during nighttime, or those who are vulnerable.
Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Rashid. I think you make some excellent points there, and I think we have to look into what you say, because you know the world we live in is not as we wish it to be, and therefore we have to make those changes. Because what I really want to do is, rather than women having to change their behavior, rather than women having to wear some sort of a wrist bracelet, which is going to alert people, is to how do we work at the educating that, you know, the person who's generally a sorry, I do apologize, my phone is connected to every device in the house and everything started ringing all at the same time. But you know what we have is, what I don't want to see is women having to you know, take extra steps. What I want to see is our schools, which are already doing a superb job and educating the youngsters. What I want to see is us seeing men change their behavior. And if we need to look into the wrists, the wristbands or the wrist bracelets, we will certainly look into that. But equally, I think one of the things I do want to now start moving towards is a enforcement hub on Ilford Lane, at the Loxford end of Ilford Lane, so that we can actually have a more visible deterrent, and we can have officers, you know, move in and out of that enforcement hub, so that it's there, it's 24/7, and we can have the police or the enforcement team, or sometimes even council officers, to be able to utilize that to engage with our residents. And we will certainly do that. And I like the suggestions you made, because if I can't change the behavior of men, we've still got to keep women safe. And you know, as somebody who's married and father of 3 daughters, I share your concerns, and I think you know, I want everybody to be able to walk safely in the night time as in the daytime. So we will work towards that. You make some great points, Councillor Rashid, and I thank you for that.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for your presentation this evening. I need to make progress, colleagues. I'm sorry for those who raised their hands late, but I'm going to do that. So I'm going to move to noting, or no, go backwards, noting the report and discussion. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. Moving to item number 6, prudential scrutiny. The forward plan was published today. The usual approach is that the acting operational director, in liaison with the chair and vice chair, considers which report should be presented at the next meeting from the cabinet forward plan. Is that agreed by the committee?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. The date of the next meeting is September the 5th, 2022. There are no urgent items and there are no public to exclude. Can I thank you all for your contribution? Can I thank officers who've been stayed late on a very, very hot day? I greatly appreciate it. Can I thank our monitoring officer, Pavinder, whose suggestion it was that we held this online rather than made you all travel into the town hall. Can I in particular thank my clerk, who has been amazingly helpful and supportive, and I'm very, very grateful. And finally, can I wish you all a very pleasant and a very safe summer, and I will see you all in September.
And to
the
you.
meeting closes. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.